everybody. Now it's time to start printing the first layer of this reductive woodblock print. I've got my registration jig already set up. You can see that I've already printed a little bit. I've already gotten my jig a little bit dirty, but I've got packing tape on there, so it's fine. And the height of the block is not going to allow my paper to even make contact with it in this case. And I've got my ink set up over here just to my right. I mixed up a little bit of etching ink, which normally I don't really recommend for relief, but it's all I have at home at the moment. So I am using a little bit of Charbonnel etching ink, and because etching ink tends to be a little bit stiff, and I don't have any kinds of modifiers necessarily, I'm actually going to be adding a little bit of Gamblin Transparent Base for relief printing. And I really love this product. I use it a lot. And obviously Charbonnel inks are always wonderful to go to also, but the Gamblin relief inks are really great. So if you have access to those, I recommend them. They are oil-based, so as you can see, I like to wear gloves, obviously, when I'm running the risk of coming into contact with that stuff directly. I'm also in a ventilated space, so I've got a window open at home, and I'm keeping my mess very contained. I'm using a little speedball brayer, and I've got a little piece of plexiglass set up here to the side, and normally I would prefer a glass surface because it's a little bit easier to clean up, and I'm not likely to scratch it with my palette knife or anything like that, but for the time being, the plexi is going to serve my purpose. And I have a little palette knife that I was using to mix my inks together. Again, I normally prefer a metal palette knife because they tend to be a little bit stiffer. This one's a little bit too flexible, and the ink has been very stiff, so it's a little bit hard to work that way. But I'm making do because that's what I've got at home right now. And so I'm just going to charge my brayer here and come over to my block. And it really helps to be inking your block in a well-lit environment. So right now I've got the sun kind of going down out my back window here, and it really allows me to see that my ink coverage is really even over the entire block. I don't want to overcharge my brayer with too much ink, so as you'll notice, it should make a little sizzling sound like this. I always pick up my brayer and let it sort of spin at the end of every stroke, and then I bring it over to the block. I want to make sure that I get my corners, and I like to apply the ink from a few different directions to make sure that I'm not missing anything. If I have too much ink on my brayer, it's going to get down into all my little fine lines and they're going to disappear. And I'm just going to have too thick of a surface of ink on my paper. It's going to take longer to dry, and so it's going to really slow me down when I have to do multiple layers. So I try to keep the ink even but solidly applied. When I'm actually printing, I prefer to take the gloves off. I'm just going to set them aside. And what I've got here is I've got my stack of printing paper right here close at hand, so I'm going to take one of these pieces that I already applied the pin and tab system to yesterday, and I'm just going to snap that right on to my pin system like this. Okay? I'm going to let the paper gently drop down over the block. And I'm going to get this piece of wax paper. This is really important because I'm using very thin paper, and without wax paper as a barrier between the back of the block and the paper and my tool that I'm going to be using to print with, I could really rip the paper easily or thin the paper by removing fiber from the back side. If you're using a really thick paper like a Reeves BFK or some other type of Western paper, a cotton rag paper, you might be interested in pre-soaking your paper. You can soak your paper or spritz it or mist it with water, put put it in a damp pack, meaning make a stack of the dampened sheets, or alternating damp, wet, or damp and dry, damp, dry, and wrap them in plastic and put them under weight overnight. And that will help disperse the moisture content throughout all of the sheets in the stack. And I find that a thick paper, when printing by hand, it just responds a little bit better when it's been dampened. But since I'm printing, like I said, with very thin paper, I'm not going to dampen it in this case. I'm using a Baron that I would use for mokuhanga printmaking, even though I'm doing a Western technique with oil-based ink today. I still find this handy for any type of hand printing relief process. And so I usually do my first pass with the mokuhanga Baron. This only applies so much pressure, and so if I were to lift my print back right now, I would have a little bit of a salty print, okay? So, you know, it's even, but it's very light, and I call that a little bit salty because you can see the sort of the texture of the paper, okay? And I want something that's a little bit more solid for this print. So I'm gonna go back over it with a wooden spoon or a wooden spatula. So this is a little object that I found in in an antique fair in upstate New York, and I really like it because it's broad and it has this edge on it, so I can get a lot of surface contact with the minimum amount of work. But in the absence of something this large, a bamboo, rice paddle can work, a bamboo or wooden spatula, and a regular wooden spoon, the kind that you can get in the baking aisle at the grocery store or even at a dollar store or at IKEA or something like that. So this is a little bit more rounded, and so the surface area that is going to actually be making contact with the block is smaller. So you're more likely to have directional marks with a smaller, surface area contact on the block. So if you're using a wooden spoon that's more rounded, you really want to go in circular motions and maybe hold it on its side. You can see that this one is worn down just slightly on that side because I use it this way a little bit more than like this. For this demo, I'm just going to continue with this. And I'm going to be going sort of in a circular motion, but I also want to go side to side, left to right, front to back, and really make sure that I avoid any really distinct directional marks. When I get to the corners and the edges, I want to be especially careful because I could easily puncture my paper under all this pressure if I slide off the corner. So when I get to the corners, I might reduce my pressure or my speed a little bit and just approach them more carefully. Always keeping my wax paper as a barrier between my burnishing tool and the back of my paper. And now in the center, I really want to make sure that I get a crisp edge on all of the little ellipses and the very small V-gouge marks and things like that. So I'm actually going to take the front lip of this paddle and I'm going to actually sort of scrape it right over the surface. So I'm not really concerned about this first layer being totally perfect because I know that it's going to get a few more layers of color on top. But I do want it to start out as even as possible. Okay, so here we have a pretty even impression, and I'm just going to snap these right off of the pins. So I just finished printing the first layer of this reductive woodblock print, and you can see that everything that I carved away is the color of the paper, which in this case is white. And now I need to either carve away more wood and print in the next color. Anything that I want to preserve as this kind of carnation red or geranium color, I need to carve it away. Otherwise it's going to get covered up by the next color. But what I decided to do rather than doing carving first was that I wanted to actually flip the block upside down and print the block as the mirror image, or reversed 180 degrees, in a slightly different color. So rather than carving away more surface area of the block, I mixed up a little bit of sepia or sanguine into my red ink, and so it's a little bit browner. And now you can see this sort of double-ended rotated image. And so again, you can still see the areas that are white are the original carved marks that I made. The images that are going to be sort of developing from this are really spontaneous. Like, I don't really know where it's going. And I'm just going to be playing this game of like carving, printing, then printing, rotated, and then carving some more. So, but each time that I print, I'm going to slightly change the color, even if I'm doing something kind of monochromatic, so that you get little, I don't know if you can see this, I'm going to bring it into the light a little bit more. So you get little variations in the color that peeks through. Okay, I don't know if you can see that. And so this is a different approach to reductive. Normally I would work with an image that is very specific, and so I'm very strategically carving away areas and leaving other areas intact to build up a multi-layered, colorful image. But in this case, I'm just going freeform and making it up as I go along. Hi everybody, I wanted to show you the final result of these prints that I showed you the process of earlier in the video. So here we have the first layer with the second impression on top of it. So this was just a carnation red that was printed, then the block was rotated and inked in a slightly browner color. And so you can see a little bit of the white peeking through, and you can see these subtle shifts in color, okay? Because I really liked it the way it looked this way, I decided to print 3 like that before I went on and changed the block, because I was worried that I wouldn't like it after I altered it. And so then I went ahead and decided to carve away some more. And here, this is the result of the next stage of the carving that I did. And so I printed it in a purple color. And again, I rotated the block 180 degrees. And so the purple got printed twice. You can see areas where, you know, it's a little bit more transparent, and then, you know, the second impression of the purple gets printed on top. And I really liked it in the stage too, and you can see actually here I made a mistake. I tore the paper. My tool slipped off the corner. So unfortunately, this is the only one that I have like this, and although I really like it, I only have one. And then I went on and carved away a little bit more of the block, and then this is the final result of that print. And again, I printed this 180 degrees, so this final stage of the carving got printed twice, and I used a green color. So although it looks kind of dark brown or black, it's actually a sap green with a little sanguine mixed into it. But once it gets layered on top of the red and the purple, it takes on this different color. So you really need to think about color mixing when you're dealing with a reductive process, because the color that you mix on the palette will almost never actually exist in your final print other than the first layer and what shows through from that, okay? So you really need to sort of anticipate the way that the transparency of the color, the tone, the temperature of the color, whether it's a warm color or a cool color, you know, that can all sort of determine how well it's going to show up in contrast to the colors and on top of the colors that are below it, okay? So I sort of knew that it was going to be a very dark color, and this is the final result. I still think I kind of like the first iteration of it a little bit better, but I'm getting used to it. And now I'm trying it with a blue block, so I'm doing another print with a similar approach. But at least I have 3 of the first one that I really like. I only have 1 of this intermediary stage, and then I've got about maybe 10 or 12 decent ones of this final stage here. Okay, so that's the evolution.